quick disclaimer before the video starts. This list is not going to include countries that require experience to play as, such as the US, China, and India. In this video, I'm going to list all the top 10 countries to play as in Rise of Nations. This list picks out the best nations to play as in the current update as of recording on the 11th of November 2023. The 10 countries picked out of all the 239 nations in the game were picked out based off of the strategic location of the country, the amount of treasury you start with, the default economic status of the country, the total population and manpower of the country, the amount of square cities it has, the variety and amount of resources it possesses, and also how enjoyable it is to play as. And as I've mentioned, the US, China, and India aren't going to be mentioned in this list because they are countries that require experience to play as. So to begin this list, on the number 10 spot is Spain. Spain has tons of strategic advantages, one of them being it sits on the border of Europe, so it has an easy gateway to Northern Africa, which is a resource-rich region. Try saying that 10 times fast. Which is a resource-rich region which has tons of oil and tons of tungsten and titanium to use for your factories. And that's not it. It also has a rugged landscape on its northern border with France, therefore serving as a deterrent, or as some would say a shield, from any attacks coming from their northern border. It's also worthy to mention that you can just take out Portugal in the first 2 years in-game, and that way you can form really easily the Iberian Union. Spain's economy is pretty good. It starts with a moderate income of 1,700,000 at the start of 2019. However, due to its home guards, it raises a military upkeep of 240,000, which deducts its starting balance to 1,500,000. Spain begins with the volunteer conscription law, scaling its initial manpower capacity to 466,000. Spain's only real threats are probably France wanting to form the Napoleonic Empire, which requires Catalonia, but you can always make a deal with them and just give them Catalonia if you don't want to go to war with them. And I do have to mention this, although it's pretty unlikely, it barely happens nowadays. The US might want to set up a military camp inside of Europe, so the closest is Spain. Spain also has 3 square cities, which are Madrid, Barcelona, and Seville. I also have to mention that Spain has tons of releasables, so keeping an eye on your stability is gonna tremendously help. Spain has an okay amount of resources for a country in Europe. It has 3 copper, 1 gold, 1.5 iron, 6 barrels of oil, 1 phosphate, and 1 tungsten, which is a pretty big deal to have tungsten if you're a European country. Other than that, Spain is a pretty good and solid country. It also has tons of strategies, which I will link down below in the description for you to go ahead and check out. And for the number 9 spot, it is Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the strongest countries in Africa. It has absolutely no neighboring threats and is one of the safest major countries to play as, which makes its location great for a player who recently started playing Rise of Nations. However, Nigeria, or any country in Africa other than the countries in Northern Africa, is really boring to play as, since there's not much competition and you're away from where most people play, thus making you feel a sense of disattachment from the entire server. However, looking past that, it's also surrounded by countries with either an arid or jungle biome, making it even more difficult to find loopholes into invading Nigeria. Nigeria is blessed to be one of the few countries to have a megacity in-game, with Nigeria's megacity being Lagos, with a whopping 17.5 million population. Imagine taxing all those people on maximum. That's the ideal number of population for some countries in-game. Nigeria also has 8 square cities in total, making it easy to tank spam, which is something to be cautious of if you choose to target Sierra Leone for titanium, or other resources needed for tank production. As Nigeria, you gain 2.5 million income. Nigeria also has home guards stationed at Lagos and Kano. Keep in mind, these troops are 220,000. So they take $700,000, so the income decreases to 1.8 million. The conscription law is set to volunteer, which gains a manpower capacity of 835,000. Overall, Nigeria is a great country to play as if you're a beginner or if you don't like being crowded with all the events happening around you at all times and like being distant from wars. And to move on to the number 8 spot, it is Egypt. Egypt can shower itself with oil since it has Saudi Arabia to its right and Algeria to its left, which are two of the most oil-rich countries in the game. Not to mention that Egypt already has a great amount of oil going for itself, which is 8 barrels. Egypt also has control of the Suez Canal, therefore making its position important to foreign powers seeking to attack any faraway enemies. Egypt is blessed with resources having 2 aluminium, 2 chromium, 2 copper, 4 gold, 8 iron, 8 oil, and 9 phosphate. Similarly to Nigeria, Egypt also has a megacity, which is Cairo. It has a population of 12 million, and it is also worthy to mention that Egypt only has 3 square cities, which are Cairo, Giza, and Alexandria. Egypt's terrain is almost all arid and for some mountains in the east, except for the land along the Nile. Egypt's only and honest threat is Turkey, just being Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. However, it is unlikely that Saudi Arabia will be a threat. Egypt actually has a lot of threats, which I have written down, but to be 100% honest, these countries are really easy to deal with and are barely considered threats. Like Libya, for example, trying to form Tunisia, or Syria trying to form the Palmyrene Empire. However, Syria is almost always just destroyed by Turkey at the start of every game. Or some really improbable threats, like the UK trying to form the British Empire, which almost never happens. So for the most part, you're really safe playing Egypt. And the best part about it is that you can have a say in what happens around the server, since you are between the most active parts of the game, which are Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, thus making your game really fun and exciting as Egypt. Egypt also has a good amount of formables, which are the African Union, the Arab League, the Islamic Caliphate, the Khedivite of Egypt, and the Mamluk Sultanate. Egypt produces 1.7 million in income and starts with a home guard consisting of 150,000 troops located in Cairo, which costs 200,000, therefore decreasing the income amount to 1.5 million. Egypt's conscription law is set to voluntary and has a manpower capacity just above 500,000. All in all, Egypt is a solid country to play as, which is for the most part exciting and fun, and also really beginner friendly, not to mention it has a great amount of resources, which is why I think it deserves a spot on this list. And for the number 7 spot is the UK. The United Kingdom is a powerful island nation which sits just above 2 of the strongest countries in Europe and the strongest countries in Western Europe, France and Germany. I know what you might be saying, doesn't that make the UK's location horrible? To which I would say, yeah, that would be the case if the UK was in an island. This means that if France and Germany don't invest into a navy and you do, then you can take advantage of them pretty easily. Plant some submarines down and attack them with a bunch of tanks, and they'll most likely rage quit. Speaking of tanks, the UK is a pretty solid country to tank spam, since it has 6 square cities and 1 megacity, which is London, and the other square cities are Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, Glasgow, and Manchester. The United Kingdom has a beginning income of 2,452,000, and you guessed it, since it has a military upkeep due to its home guard, which is 80,000 on both London and Birmingham, making the military upkeep to 320,000. It deducts its final balance to 2,100,000, which is still the highest on this list so far. The UK doesn't generate that much resources, but it generates three of the most important resources, which is oil, iron, and tungsten. Yes, tungsten, that one resource everybody wants. And if you mine the tungsten the UK generates, you can have enough to support an entire motor factory. It's worthy to mention that the UK has a lot of releasables, so you might want to keep an eye on that. The UK starts with the volunteer conscription law and has a manpower capacity of 616,000. France is your only threat, which should be easy to deal with if you play your cards right in the early game. All in all, the UK is an amazing island nation to play as, and if you're looking forward to playing in Europe and want to have a little bit of spice in your game. And moving on to the number 6 spot, it is Turkey. Turkey is an absolute powerhouse in its region. It's stronger than almost every single country around itself and has the ability to rule over all of Eastern Europe along with Western Asia. However, I can't make up my mind whether Turkey has a great or horrible location, because for one, it has to keep caution of Iran and Russia and Egypt all at the same time. However, it makes up for itself having the ability to rule over almost all the lands around itself and having a great terrain to protect itself from Iran, with its terrain being mountainous and semi-mountainous in the east and hilly almost everywhere else. You also have control of the Istanbul Canal and have a mega city, which is Istanbul, which has a population of 10 million, and you have a total of 6 square cities. The 6 square cities are Gaziantep, Adana, Izmir, Bursa, Ankara, and Istanbul. You can also take out Syria and Bulgaria at the start of every game, so I guess you can add their square cities too. Turkey has a great amount of manpower, which is 731,000, with the conscription law being set to volunteer at default. Turkey has really good resources, which are 3 chromium, 2 copper, 5 gold, 9 oil, and 0.5 titanium. Turkey has an income of 1.8 million. However, 400,000 of that 1.8 million goes to 100,000 home guards in Istanbul and 100,000 home guards in Ankara, therefore decreasing its income to 1.4 million. Turkey's threats are Iran and rarely Russia or Egypt, but just watch out for Iran. Do everything in your power to not fight with Iran, because it's just utterly painful to go to war with Iran and it is very time consuming due to Iran's terrain. Looking past that, Turkey has great stats and is anything but boring to play as. But anyways, moving on to the number 5 spot, it is Germany. Now we're getting on to the big boys. Germany had to be on this list. Germany deserves the top 5 spot purely because of how fun it is to play as. And on top of that, the amount of square cities you have is just perfect for tank spamming. It has a total of 10 square cities. Yes, 10 square cities. It has a final total income of 2,100,000. Hyperant, when he was making this country, definitely knew what he was doing, since he also gave Germany 13 barrels of oil. So it just goes to show that Germany was made for tank spamming. You can also take out the Netherlands in the beginning and Belgium, so I guess you can add their square cities too. Now Germany is a pretty good and well-known country in Rise of Nations. You can't watch a top 10 list without it having Germany. So I'm gonna keep this nice and short and just say it's Germany. You know, it deserves to be on the top 5 list. But to move on to the number 4 spot, it is Iran. Now, being Iran is just absolutely beautiful, but playing against Iran is hell on earth. There's nothing more annoying than getting obliterated by Iran, purely due to the fact that you can barely move on Iran's terrain, which is mountainous and semi-mountainous, and making its capital almost impossible to reach. I mean, you can always attack Iran's capital through the Caspian Sea, but that in and of itself is difficult to reach anyways. Iran is the equivalent of a brick wall in Rise of Nations. It's almost pointless to attack Iran unless you really know the game. Iran has 6 square cities. Iran also has an income of 1.9 million and a manpower capacity of 645,000, with its conscription law being voluntary. Now, Iran has some pretty good resources. It has uranium. Yes, uranium, one of the only countries to have uranium in the entire game. They also have 1 phosphate, 15 barrels of oil, 3 iron, 2 gold, 2 copper, and 2 chromium. Oh yeah, and remember when I mentioned that Iran has a natural income of 1.9 million? Well, I forgot to deduct the home guard balance, which deducts its final balance to 1.5 million, which I guess you could say Iran has one of the worst incomes in the entire game, but it makes up for that with its terrain. If you're feeling a bit mischievous, then Iran is the perfect fit for you. To put things into perspective, Iran is basically Ethiopia, but on steroids. This nation is one of the more better countries in the game and should be taken much more seriously. But to move on to the number 3 spot, we're in the top 3 right now, it is Japan. Now, Japan can be overlooked because it sits next to arguably the strongest country in the game, China. But don't let that fool you, Japan can most definitely beat China. Japan is another powerful island nation just like the UK, but unlike the UK, Japan has an income of 9,800,000. This is because Japan follows the democracy ideology at default, and with that ideology comes tons of cash. And here's the best part, you can always use the tax reform policy to get a 25% boost on tax income, which should boost your income to around 12 million. Another reason of why Japan is just absolutely insane to play is that it has a manpower capacity of 900,000, with its conscription law being disarmed. And if you were to make the conscription law to voluntary, then you'd be left with a manpower capacity of 1,800,000. which is just broken. Japan has 11 square cities and it has not one but 2 megacities, which are Tokyo and Osaka, with Tokyo counting to 36 million of Japan's population. Here's another pro to Japan. It only has one releasable, which is Ryukyu. So even though it is recommended, you don't have to worry about stability that much. But I guess what you can call a con to Japan's success is that it lacks in resources, since it only has 3 copper, 1 gold, and 4.5 oil. But it does have 2 titanium, which I'm pretty sure is enough for a steel factory. Overall, Japan is the ideal country to play as, since it's also really fun to play as and has beautiful stats. So you might be asking, who dares to come in at number 2, surpassing Japan in all its glory? And for that, I'd have one word to say: Brazil. This nation is the real deal. It's not only undoubtedly the best and strongest nation in its continent of South America, but also sometimes compared to arguably the best nation in the game, the US. Brazil has 381 cities. Yes, you heard me right, 381 cities, and 22 of them are square cities. That's the largest number of square cities a country possesses on this list. It also has a population of 127 million. Similarly to Japan, it also has not one but 2 megacities, which are Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. It also has a manpower capacity of 2.5 million, with its conscription law obviously being voluntary. And unlike Japan, Brazil is packed with resources. It has 5 aluminium, 4 copper, 3 gold, 20 oil, 3 phosphate, and 2 titanium. Oh, and did I forget to mention that Brazil has an income of, 12.8 million. This is because, just like Japan, it follows the democracy ideology. And if you use the tax reform policy, then you can boost your tax income by 25%, which according to my calculations should leave you with 15 million. Brazil can form the Empire of Brazil really easily by only invading Uruguay, which gets you more resources like tungsten, for example, and boosts your ideology's power by 5%. In other words, more cash. There are some problems with this country, however, since Argentina can be a player and annex Uruguay. But if push comes to shove, Brazil outpowers Argentina by a lot. Brazil also has lots of releasables, so keeping an eye on stability will help immensely. Brazil's terrain is predominantly hilly and semi-mountainous in areas nearing the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Brazil is also in possession of the majority of the Amazon rainforest, which leads to more than half of its biome being jungle. Now, Brazil is just absolutely insane, bro. Imagine if this nation was just like in Europe, for example, then it would really be the number one country. But to move on to the number one spot is basically Brazil, but in Europe, which is Russia. Now, I'd just like to give a round of applause to Russia before anything, I mean, like, it's been a long list, and for Russia to reach the number one top spot is just insane, bro. Now, Russia is a country with a lot of potential. You can either rule the entire server or become Germany's little brother. One of the reasons why I decided to put Russia at the number one spot is because even though it is a non-aligned country, it still has an income of 3.8 million. Now, while being Russia, money doesn't really matter to you, since you can make big bank pretty easily. You can take out all the countries which have lots of money but are small compared to you, like Estonia, for example, Lithuania, Georgia, Azerbaijan. After annexing these countries and making a peace treaty with them, you can take out 75% of their treasury. Also, while being Russia, you almost have half the entire server stock of tungsten, and you can get more pretty easily by invading Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Not only that, but you can also get other resources like titanium and iron too. The entire server will have to depend on you because of your resources if they want to succeed. And this is me from the future, guys. And I just realized while editing this that I did not list Russia's resources. So what better time to mention Russia's resources than now? Now, Russia has 5.63 aluminium, 2 chromium, 12.41 copper, 5.13 diamond, 11 gold, 25 iron, 18 barrels of oil, 5 phosphate, 2 titanium, 13 tungsten, and 1 uranium. Yeah, I guess you now know why I said the entire server has to rely on you. Anyways, back with the video. Now, I know I'll get a lot of hate for this, but if you go through the route of fascism, not communism, fascism, and are able to form the Soviet Union, then you are truly unstoppable. Now, Russia did get nerfed, but it still is the best nation in the game. It used to have no releasables, and well, now Russia has let's just say more than one releasable. But no worries, since Russia makes up for it by having tons of perks, like being able to do the press censorship policy for better stability, unlike Brazil and Japan. And overall, Russia has a pretty big population, so the MP amount doesn't disappoint, since it starts with 4 million manpower, with the conscription law being limited. Russia also has 481 cities, and 11 of those are square cities. Now, the square city numbers may be less than Brazil, but for what it's worth, playing in Europe rather than South America and actually having fun and playing a big part in the server, I'd personally say it's much better. To be honest, Russia in and of itself, it's weird to look at its stats, because when playing, you feel that the country is way more powerful. This is because Russia has powerful neighbors and can take them out pretty easily because they are weak compared to Russia. For example, Ukraine or Kazakhstan. During the game, you conceptualize these countries to be a part of Russia because you normally take them out really easily in the early game. So you might tend to think of their square cities being yours and their treasury being yours. So you might think that Russia's stats, for example, are nerfed on this list, but this just goes to show how broken Russia can be if played correctly. Russia is also an amazing nation for players who are somewhat beginners but have a basic understanding of the game. Russia's north is completely protected by the Arctic biome, And Russia's Asia-Europe divide also has a semi-mountainous terrain cut. Also, its far east is completely hilly and is somewhat covered by the Arctic biome, as well as the winter and severe winter biome during December and January. So America can't do anything sneaky with Alaska. Also, if you want to play, I guess, as a gold tier nation, even if you don't have the XP for it, then Russia is the country for you. Since as Russia, the game gives you an opportunity to actually become a tier 7 country by forming the Soviet Union. Therefore, you can join America, India, and China as one of those top tier countries. Best part about it is it really isn't even that hard. It can only be a bit time consuming depending on how experienced you are at the game. All the countries around you are considered weak when compared to you, so you should have little to no difficulty in annexing them. Unfortunately, one of the downsides to Russia is that it borders China. However, it isn't getting that much common now, since China can't be bothered to waste all the time and effort and cash and manpower into invading Russia, so it doesn't happen as much as you think. And with all this in mind, Russia definitely deserves the top 1 spot. Now, Russia is one of those countries that has a lot of strategies to play as, so I'm just gonna mention some links down in the description for you to check out of some of Russia's strategies. And while you're there, drop a like and subscribe to the channel since I'm pretty new. And there we go, we've just finished mentioning the top 10 Rise of Nations to play as, I guess. Now, there are some honorable mentions that I think kinda deserve the place on this list, but for some reason couldn't get themselves on this list for reasons like economy or their strategic location or just because of how boring it is to play as. Now, the honorable mentions are France, Morocco, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, Italy, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. Now, I also wanted to just mention and thank you guys for the support you've shown me on my last video about Rise of Nations, and hopefully I will be continuing on making Rise of Nations related content, so stay peaked for that and subscribe to never miss another upload. Anyways, this has been Geo Authentic, and I'll see you guys in the next one.